What's going on, guys? Alex here, and today I'm going to be taking a look at an update for the CARES Act, specifically the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, and the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan sides of things. These were the two main programs that were part of that CARES Act, and at this point, even having been signed on March 27, 2020, here we are on April 18th, 2020, and quite frankly, the money is gone. That means that the $10 billion that was allocated for the EIDL side, taken up, gone, and the $349 billion that was allocated on the PPP side of the Paycheck Protection Program, that's gone too. So it's interesting to take a look back and see how this played out, because there are a lot of less than happy business owners out there that say that their small business didn't have an opportunity even to take advantage of any of these programs because of how they were run and how they were put together. So it'll be interesting to take a look back and see if any of those claims have any merit. Now, it is tough to put together a program like this last minute, and that's what Congress had to do. They didn't have enough time. This coronavirus thing came pretty much out of nowhere. Depends who you ask, I guess. But aside from that, it did happen very abruptly, and the challenge then becomes creating a program that can serve as a bailout, but also one that is allocated fairly amongst the different parties that need it, because you have millions of businesses that can use this funding, and the question then becomes, will it get to them? What are the amounts? And how does this all play out when all is said and done? So if you look on the small business subreddit, and again, you got to take everything here with a grain of salt, but if you look here, you'll see that there are quite a few unhappy campers. And just kind of scrolling through here, you'll see that a lot of small businesses, it looks like, are complaining that they didn't have even an opportunity to partake in this program because their application didn't get processed, or they didn't hear anything from their lender until they got an email saying, sorry, this program ran out of money. Oops. And that's even the case when their applications were submitted pretty early on, when this program just opened up. So if you look here, you'll see that there certainly looks like some unhappy campers. On one hand, I don't know if those people who get funding are going to rush to Reddit and talk about their experience. They might be out taking shots right now and celebrating. And with that, you may have only the naysayers here, the ones that didn't get funding for the most part, expressing their dissatisfaction with it. That's certainly a possibility, and we need to keep that in mind as something that could be a driving factor as to why these posts are overwhelmingly negative. So aside from Reddit, we can also take a look at some of the media reports that are out there pertaining to this Paycheck Protection Program. And we see there's a pretty good article put out by CBS News. And let me make sure you guys can see that. All right. I'll also drop a link into the chat. Feel free to reach out with any questions while we're going through here. I'll try to address those. So it says here that the Paycheck Protection Program, billions went to large companies and missed virus hotspots. Okay. So taking a look here, it says the rush to distribute nearly $350 billion in federal aid from a popular and now empty small business relief fund resulted in the government sending billions to areas of the country with relatively few novel coronavirus cases, to companies in industries that have not been the hardest hit by the shutdown, and to companies that are not even small businesses. Interesting. So I started reading this, and this has a lot of good information in it. I wanted to corroborate it. So while we're reading that, I did find a document that was released by the SBA, the Small Business Administration, and that's this beautiful blue wonder. So as we're going through here, I wanted to just corroborate some of the things that are in this CBS article to this document that was recently released. This was as of 4/16/2020, so pretty good information there. Let's just take a peek at what this report says as a general overview. So it talks about the fact that there was 1.661 million loans made in total, and that the net approved dollars was $342 billion. And you might be asking, why is there a difference between that and the $349 billion that was appropriated, the difference could well be the commissions or the reimbursements that were paid to the banks to administer these loans and process these loans. So that's why we're seeing a difference between the total and the net approved dollars. Finally, we have the lender count, which was 4,975 lenders, so just under 5,000 banks, it looks like, participated in this PPP program. We have a page here where it denotes the amount of the approved PPP amounts by state. So it's kind of interesting to see how that plays out. And the article will mention some interesting points about this, but we'll come back to that. Finally, we have loan sizes. So we'll see the loan size denoted here. We have the number of approved loans within that bracket, the approved dollars in total for each bracket, the percentage of the total loans that fall within each bracket, and the percentage of the loans that were allocated for each one of those loan amounts. And we'll take another look at that as well. One thing to note, overall average loan size is $206,000. Okay. So furthermore, it breaks down the allocation by industry, and we'll come back to this as well, but we'll note that construction, professional, scientific, and technical services, and manufacturing were among the top recipients of these loans, if you look at the amount of approved dollars overall. So we'll come back to that as well. Finally, you have the PPP lenders that are listed here. For some interesting reason, they didn't identify them by name, but I'm sure some Freedom of Information Act requests will take care of that in short order. It's a separate issue. The approved loan amounts, or the approved loans in total for each institution, the approved dollars, and the approved average approved size. So this gives us an interesting insight as to where CBS is getting a lot of their information. And we'll kind of go back and forth and cross-reference this stuff just so we get a basis of where all this stuff is coming from. So let's go back to the article. And it says here, so where did the Paycheck Protection Program's ultra-low interest loans to small businesses go so quickly? Here are the early details from the latest available U.S. Small Business Administration data. They're probably referring to that document that we just looked at. Businesses in Texas got more PPP loans than any other state, although Texas has nearly 16,500 COVID-19 cases, or the 10th biggest coronavirus disease caseload in the U.S., according to Friday data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. New York, with about 216,000 cases, by far the most of any state, ranked fourth in the number of PPP loans. All right, let's take a look. So if we go back to our document here, we can see that Texas had 134,737 loans in the amount of about $28 billion. And New York, let's just take a look at that, has $20 billion. So Texas has more in terms of the dollar amount as far as the loans go, but New York has more cases, but less in terms of loans. Now, I don't know if that needs to be necessarily a linear relationship between the two, the number of cases versus the amount of loans that you get in a particular state, but it's an interesting point nonetheless. Let's continue. This is very controversial, this next point. The owner of Ruth's Chris Steakhouse's chain got $20 million from the Small Business Loan Program, despite having more than 5,000 employees and $468 million in revenue last year. It is one of the more than 50 publicly traded companies that have already disclosed nabbing nearly $250 million in PPP funds. So a lot of small businesses are up in arms about this because Ruth's Chris arguably is not a small business, just given the numbers. You know, there's a lot of smaller businesses out there that are struggling. And the reason that they got $20 million, because if you reference the spreadsheet that we looked at a little while ago, a few videos back that we did together, you'll see that $10 million was the limit. It's supposed to be the lesser of $10 million, 2.5 times the average monthly payroll costs. But what Ruth's Chris did was that they have two subsidiaries, I believe, that registered, or two divisions rather, that registered for this program, and they both got the maximum amount. So that's how they got $20 million instead of $10 million. Now, at first glance, this may seem extremely excessive and unnecessary and a blatant violation of the idea of helping small businesses. But on the other side, you have to put yourself in the position of the executives of this company. Here comes a very low interest loan opportunity, or even better, a lot of that loan may be forgiven if it's used for particular purposes. So in essence, free money in a very difficult situation. Are you going to turn that down? Are you going to say, no, let's leave it for the small businesses and let's not take that loan for ourselves? Some might say that's what they should have done. But on the other hand, if you put yourself in the position of the executives and the shareholders, I'm sure they'll have a different viewpoint. Now, whether Roots Chris is small business or not remains to be seen, but I can't blame them for applying for this thing if it's available, even though they may not have needed it completely, because free money is difficult to ignore. When you're an executive of a big company, you have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize shareholder value. And how can you let this pass you by, especially if you're eligible for it and there's a good chance you'll be approved? It's one of those questions, but that's what happened there. And furthermore, it says construction businesses received the most aid of any industry from the PPP, more than Main Street retail stores that have essentially shut down and become the public face of the coronavirus recession. Construction firms, meanwhile, have been deemed an essential business in all but 6 states, allowing most to continue operating. That's interesting. And if we look at that report, we'll see that construction businesses are the biggest recipients of these loans if you look at the total approved dollars. And it's interesting that there's only 6 states in which the construction industry is not deemed essential, which means that they can continue operating in the vast majority of the states in the U.S., which can mean that the disruption that they face is a lot less substantial than the one faced by the restaurant business, where they just have such a steep cut in the amount of customers that they're dealing with. It hurts them a lot more, arguably. Another consideration is that if you have retail stores that aren't deemed essential, they're hurt a lot more relatively than construction would be, you'd think. But retail trade is all the way down here at 8.59%, whereas construction is 13.12%. So it's interesting to see what kind of happened there. So continuing on, there's another few tidbits here in this wonderful article. It goes to break down different state allocations. We kind of touched on that already. And it also continues to say that other restaurant chains taping, probably should be tapping. Come on, CBS, spell check. Other restaurant chains tapping the PPP fund include sandwich chain Potbelly and the U.S. division of Kura Sushi, which has over 450 locations in Japan, where its parent company has a stock value of $800 million. The Shake Shack chain also said it got a $10 million PPP loan despite laying off 1,000 employees. The Paycheck Protection Program is supposed to encourage companies to retain and keep paying employees even if businesses are shut. All right, so fascinating how this has played out, because it seems like the last-minute nature of the program has left opportunities for bigger companies or ones that you wouldn't consider offhand to be a small business to take advantage of this situation and receive a loan that will eventually be forgiven at the cost of some of the smaller businesses. So looking at this, I always need to put things into context. So I said, okay, we have some information. Let's try to wrap our minds around the overall scope of what small business even looks like in the U.S. How many small businesses are there? Because we know that there's, according to this document, there were 1.6 million loans approved. Does that represent 10% of the small businesses in the country? 20%? We had to find out. And you know that I know that you know that we found the information. So let's take a look at that. Now, first of all, before we go there, let's just confirm that these programs are out of funds. Go to the SBA website, Paycheck Protection Program, and you go down here, and you see that there's a lapse in appropriations. The SBA is currently unable to accept new applications for the Paycheck Protection Program based on available appropriations funding. So the PPP is out of money. It's done. Next, on the EIDL side, Economic Injury Disaster Loan Emergency Advance, same thing. Lapse in appropriations. The SBA is unable to accept new applications at this time because of lack of appropriations. Applicants who have already submitted their applications will continue to be processed on a first-come, first-served basis. This is kind of a controversial point on the PPP side because a lot of business owners are accusing the banks of front-loading the bigger clients or front-loading the bigger loan amounts at the cost of the smaller businesses, which were kind of pushed to the back of the line. So we'll get back to that. Now, in terms of small business, what are we even talking about? Let's go to the Sba Information guide that I found here. Let me throw a link into the chat for you guys so you can take a look at that as well. Okay. All right, so 2018 Small Business Profile. Let's actually find the link for this. Okay. There you go. I'm going to throw the link into the chat. Rocking and rolling, guys. Love it. So we have that. Let's go back to this wonderful, beautiful blue document. So it says here in the United States, and this is the 2018 Small Business Profile, U.S. Small Business Administration. This is from the SBA directly. It says here that in the United States, there's 30.2 million small businesses. All right. Now, obviously, we need to define small business. So let's take a look. And we see that on this portion of the slide, we have a few categories here. And we have small business employment, we have total private employment, and small business share. Okay. Does this help us define it? Not really. Let's keep looking. All right. This is more of a useful chart here. So small businesses by industry. You see that you have the industry listed here. You have 1 to 499 employees shown here. 1 to 20 employees shown here. Non-employer firms shown here. And then total small firms here. So this is the 30 million in total. Let me make sure you guys can see this. Okay. Hopefully that is better. So this is the 30.2 million small businesses in the United States. You have the various industries broken out here. And one interesting note is that even though it's considered here up to basically under 500 employees, we see that the vast majority of these businesses have 1 to 20 employees out of this grouping right here. So if you have 5.8 million companies with less than 500 employees, 5.2 of those have less than 21 employees. So you can see that the vast majority of that population skews toward the 1 to 20 employee range. Furthermore, you have a lot of non-employer firms. Now, what does that mean? Now, if we take a look at the definition of this from the United States Census of non-employer businesses, we'll see that it is the following. All right, so a non-employer business is defined as one that has no paid employees, has annual gross receipts of $1,000 or more, and is subject to federal income taxes. Most non-employers are self-employed individuals operating very small unincorporated businesses, which may or may not be the owner's principal source of income. All right, so that helps us define a little bit of what we're looking at when we talk about small businesses and non-employer firms. But we can see that the vast majority of these companies are either non-employer or self-employed individuals. And on top of that, we have the firms with 1 to 20 employees. And we could see that the firms with 20 to 499 employees are the minority here. So it does skew towards the smaller end of things. But I think the important takeaway here is that in the United States, we have 30.2 million small businesses. The other important thing is that these small businesses employed 58.9 million people, or 47.5% of the private workforce in 2015. All right. So even though there's the term small businesses, they handle about half of the employment in the United States. So it's pretty substantial from that aspect. Difficult to just disregard it because it is a force to be reckoned with overall. So that gives us a little bit of context. All right. And, let's reconcile that to what we saw in the PPP document that we looked at. And we'll see that this doesn't really paint a great picture of where the PPP program is going, because we see that there's 30.2 million small businesses in the United States. Okay. But we know that there's 1.6 million loans that were made. So the question then becomes, did a lot of these small businesses even bother applying? Because we don't know how many applied. We only know how many were approved. So that's a question. The other question is, if a substantial number did apply, why is it that a good number of them did not receive any loans? And I took a little bit of time in looking through this document that was released as of 4/16/2020 to try to gather any sort of pattern or take a look as far as if the numbers seem skewed in one direction or another. And some things did stand out. Nothing proves anything, but overall, if we take a look here, it is interesting to note how the state breakdowns work and the fact that they're not tied to any sort of cases of COVID-19 or anything like that. It seems to be pretty random as far as how the different state allocations worked out. That's one thing to note. Another thing is, in terms of the loan sizes, if we look at the different brackets here, we can see that the approved loans in this small bracket represented 74% of the total number of loans. So these are 150,000 and under in terms of the loan size. In terms of the amount that was allocated, it's only 17.04%. And we can see that the majority of the funds were allocated to the bracket of $350,000 to $1 million in terms of the loan size. Now, let's remember that the loan size for the PPP program was determined as the lesser of $10 million, or 2.5 times average monthly payroll costs, including wages for employees making under $100,000. So let's consider that. So if we're looking at even the lower end, $350,000, okay, if that is 2.5 times monthly payroll, then if we divide that by 2.5, we're looking at $140,000 as the monthly payroll amount. Now, exactly what that number includes and doesn't include is a bit nuanced, but in very general terms, that's what we're looking at. So if we annualize that $140,000, multiply it by 12, we're looking at $1.68 million as the annual approximate payroll cost of the businesses that are getting these loans. And that's just a starting point, right? Because it starts at 350, goes to $1 million for that bracket. And it just looks like the vast majority of those loans were given to businesses that are above that bracket amount. Because if we throw this all wonderfulness into a spreadsheet, I love spreadsheets. Anybody that knows me knows how much I love spreadsheets. So let's actually delve into this a little bit more, make sure we have a clear picture of what happened. Okay. So if we have the loan size here, we have the different brackets. We have the number of approved loans. I think it's good to play around with the numbers a little bit because that could tell us a bit more about what happened. Bear with me, guys. Talk amongst yourselves. All right. I actually had somebody call me on the phone right at the end of busy season, because this is April 18th right now, and they told me, yeah, listen, I saw your videos on YouTube about this program, but you didn't upload anything for a while, so you need an update. So they took the time to reach out and express their displeasure that I didn't update the videos. So here's your update, everyone. I don't want to keep anybody waiting. I'm not one to disappoint. All right. Okay. So we have the information all up in here. So let's take a look. Now, in terms of the overall allocation, if we consider just the loans above $350,000 in terms of the loan size and up, that represents almost 70% of the overall loans allocated. Okay, so that's something to note, because this gives us a bit of a measure as to kind of where the funds went. So if we add up all these percentages here, we can see that it's about 70% right there, which could indicate that some of these smaller companies were not even allowed a loan. The ones that, $50,000, $60,000, $80,000, they didn't make it through the program, it looks like, because the vast majority of the funds seem to have been allocated to that top tier. But now you might say, looking at this information, well, Alex, come on, look at this number. Number of approved loans is 1.2 million. And if you look at any of the other brackets, they're a lot smaller. So there was a lot of work done here. Okay. Well, let's reconcile that with a different document that I found. It's a similar PowerPoint presentation, but this one is from 4/13/2020. And the other document that we were looking at was from 4/16. So let's take a look. Let me see if I can line all this up so we could see everything at the same time. And we do get a different viewpoint if we take a look at it this way. All right. Let's line this all up. Okay. So that should work. Now, the one thing that I wanted to take a look at, and this is going to get a little small, guys, but bear with me. Let's zoom in on this. On loan size. And this is interesting because it gives us an idea of the chronology in terms of how this played out over time, because now we're getting a new dimension to this thing, a new axis, if you will, because before we were dealing with just static information with the 4/16 document. All right, looks like you guys could see this. Okay, let me make it even more visible. All righty. Okay, we're going to do it this way. Here we are. I'm going to zoom in. Okay. What I'll do is I'll throw this information into a spreadsheet so it's a little easier for us to see. But overall, what I want to do is kind of take a look at how things change. So this information is from 4/16. All right, so we'll get some color coding happening here. And let's provide some spacing here. And I want to just get an idea of how this changed over time, because that can be pretty insightful to see if there's any patterns that might indicate that there was some favoritism happening as far as discrimination possibly against small businesses. Now, I don't like to have any sort of hyperbole happening on my channel, so let's be sort of scientific about this. Bear with me here. All right. Okay, so this gives us the 4/16 amounts. Okay. Now what I want to do is load in the 4/13 amounts. And that's what this is right here. All right, so we have the same brackets. We have the approved loans. All right, I guess we don't need category on this guy. Okay. So we have then 4/13/2020. Okay. I'll sing a song right now, but I'm not trying to get copyright claim this early into my YouTube career. I don't want to disappoint the fan that reached out to me and said, hey, where's my videos? I'm going to need some update videos. Let's make it happen. All right. So if we take the percentage of the count and the percentage of amount, let's see where that brings us in terms of percentage change. Because it's only 3 days. So if there's not a dramatic change there, then that might be indicative that this is a wild goose chase. But if we can see any sort of pattern and deduce what might have happened, that could be interesting, to say the least. All right, so now that we have these different categories, what did I do here? We want that to be chronological, so let's flip these bad boys. Okay. This is what happens when you talk while you put numbers together. This is why accountants are very quiet. All right, let's move that here. Let's move this here. And let's move that here because we want the before to be to the left of the after. Some philosophy right there. All right, so now if we take a look at the percentage change, curious what that would do for us. Now we have to do some math. Nobody likes math. Okay, divided by this amount here. Okay, let's make that a percentage. Okay. Okay, so this is kind of the area where we're going to focus. Let's make it kind of bright. Okay, so now put that here and here and here. Let's see what this tells us, if anything. Now, alrighty. So looking at the percentage change in the approved loans, we see that, and this is kind of interesting, the most significant change in the amount of loans approved happened in that small category of 150,000 and under. And this is in the last 3 days because let's not forget the document we're looking at to begin with is 4/13/2020 and the next document is 4/16/2020. So it's kind of interesting that in just 3 days, the biggest category of change happens to be this smallest category. Now, you could see that the other categories didn't change as much in terms of the number of approved loans. So certainly might be indicative that there was some front loading of the bigger loan amounts because otherwise, why would the most significant change be in that smallest category? I would imagine that if it was based on first come, first serve, that the relationship between the categories would change in a linear fashion, not that one category would suddenly take off in the last 3 days. Now, what possible explanation can we have for that? One can only surmise that after some tea. One possible explanation is that the bigger businesses had their accounting more readily available and in order, which means that they were able to more efficiently get their loans in and processed. It's a possibility. Aside from that, it may be that the small business owners took longer to apply for it. They weren't aware of it, so they didn't have legal counsel or anybody really advising them of the availability of this program or how to apply. So that might be another explanation. But that's curious to me that the biggest category increase in the number of loans, not just the amount, but the number, was in that tiniest category. And as you can see, that follows in a pretty linear, well, I don't want to say linear, but it's still applicable here, it looks like, even in these brackets of loans, being that they increased a lot more in terms of overall number than these. Now, again, I would expect these to change in a linear fashion, but that's what it is, all right? This is why we're comparing them. So in terms of the number of loans, we see this pattern here. In terms of the approved dollars, let's see if we have a similar pattern, and we do. For the most part, there's it's a little bit less obvious of a trend here, but it's still applicable. It looks like the first three categories increased more substantially in terms of the amount that was allocated than these other categories, and this is live, so I don't have a great explanation for that at this point. Maybe I need to think about it a little bit more, get a little tea happening, but I don't really have a great explanation for why that would be. So let's continue. So in terms of the percentage of the count, so we're comparing percentage of the loans over time. Okay, so we're seeing here a pretty obvious trend here in that all of the relative percentages decreased, and really that last remaining category of 150,000 another. You know what? Let me do one of these. Freeze frame is a beautiful thing, guys. All right, this should make it a lot clearer. Now, the percentage of the count increased in one category and not any of the others. So I think that illustrates even more clearly that there seems to have been some front loading happening here, and that the smaller loans, for whatever reason, were approved later in those last 3 days before funding ran out. I don't know what the reason is, but these are the numbers talking. I haven't seen anybody kind of put this analysis together yet in terms of the media outlets and so forth, but interesting to note. So aside from that, we have the same situation happening. It's pretty obvious scenario in that it looks like the smaller loans in those past 3 days, the percentage of the amounts definitely increased overall, whereas they took share away, if you will, or decreased the percentage allocated to each one of those other categories. So certainly fascinating here that there is this backloading, it looks like, of the smaller loans and a front loading of the bigger loans, it would appear. Now, there could be other reasons as to how we can explain this, but none that I could come up with at the moment. So hopefully you guys could see how this scenario played out. Sort of interesting. I didn't expect this to be such an obvious trend. Let me go ahead and save this. Well, we'll save it later, but that's what it is. Overall, it's going to be difficult to assess how this played out until we see more information in terms of what the applications look like, what the chronology of the applications was, and overall how this all played out. It'll be interesting to run a retrospective and see how the amounts are allocated, what the processes look like, what happened on the banking side. I don't know if we'll get as much transparency as we need on this, but that's how things have worked themselves out. So that's all I have for you guys at the moment. I think everybody can draw different conclusions in terms of what transpired and how it happened. But at this point, one thing that is certainly conclusive is that the Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL are out. Sounds like Congress may be working on some sort of update program to where they put more funds into EIDL and or PPP, but it looks like they're less enthusiastic about releasing a bill quickly. It looks like the politics are working their way into the process, and that could mean that there's going to be delays. There's going to be mitigation in terms of how this is going to be playing out. And certainly it may be the case that the allocations are going to be done differently, whereas big businesses like Roots, Chris, and all these other publicly traded companies don't end up with funds, whereas small business owners that have, 5-figure amounts that they're looking to recoup from this thing don't get left out for whatever reason. But that's all I have for you guys. We can draw our own conclusions as far as this wonderful situation. Drop me a line in the comments below. Let me know what you think. I love reading your comments. And I will try to provide update videos on this as it changes. But right now, it looks like we've kind of hit the brakes on the program for now, for better or worse. And we have to wait for Congress to make any sort of updates. Now, overall, hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there in this craziness. And till next time, thanks for watching.